In trauma care, every minute matters. The golden hour, that first 60 minutes after injury, when a patient needs to get to the hospital, is when fast, definitive treatment offers the best odds of survival. But much of that hour is consumed before the patient ever reaches the hospital. Time lost to the 911 call, dispatching an EMS unit, and the time it takes to arrive on scene. The one piece of that chain we can reliably measure is road time, the travel time from the scene to the hospital, and this is where researchers normally focus their work. In this series, we're going to map that final measurable segment of the golden hour, road time, and explore what it tells us about trauma access using Philadelphia as our case study. This is the first of 3 connected tutorials. In part 1, we'll build travel time polygons around Philadelphia's trauma centers and see how many shooting incidents fall within or beyond those coverage zones. In part 2, we'll use the best facilities tool to model which hospitals would likely receive those patients and how that workload is distributed. And in part 3, we'll examine the city's trauma desert and simulate how adding a mobile trauma stabilization unit could close that gap. Let's start by mapping the coverage itself, the road time portion of the golden hour. To get started, I created a project in ArcGIS Online and brought into it 3 layers. The first is the layer that includes the 6 trauma hospitals in Philadelphia for adult trauma incidents. The Philadelphia EMS transports to these 6 hospitals, and you'll notice that one of them is outside Philadelphia city limits. It's this one, Abington General Hospital in Montgomery County. Philadelphia EMS will send trauma cases here when it makes sense from a location standpoint to do it, generally from the northeast part of Philadelphia. The second layer is the city limits layer, and it's a projected layer with meters as its distance because once we create the drive time areas based on the hospitals, the tool uses the metric system for its area and distances. So we have to make sure that our city limits matches that once we start to calculate how much geography within the city the travel areas take. And then the third layer is the shooting victimizations in 2024. You can see that there were 947 of them. We'll use those in the best facilities analysis in the next video, but for now it's good to visualize them just to get a sense of what we'll be working with down the road. For now, we can turn it off and focus on the hospitals. Remember that we're going to create drive time areas around each hospital to see how much of Philadelphia is covered within 15 minutes drive time of an acute care center that can receive trauma cases. So to do that, we're going to come over into analysis, type in generate travel areas, just like this. The input layer will be the Philadelphia trauma hospitals. Travel mode is driving time. Some of the research will use travel distance, usually like 5 miles as an upper threshold. The thing is that in cities, as a lot of people know, traffic plays a big role in how far people can get to in a designated amount of time. So for me, it's really more about travel time more than it is travel distance because traffic plays such a big role in transports. We're going to have 3 different thresholds here. We're going to go 0 to 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, and then 10 to 15 minutes as our upper threshold. And of course, these are minutes. And because we're talking about transporting potentially gunshot victims to hospitals, instead of calculating travel times going away from those locations, we're going to calculate them going toward those locations. And of course, this is important when we think about using the actual street network with turning restrictions and one-way streets. In terms of arrival time, we'll choose now. And for the overlap policy, I like to use dissolve because we're going to be conducting a citywide analysis. We're not so much interested in comparing one hospital to the next in terms of its own drive time areas at the 5, 10, and 15 minute levels. Instead, we're looking across the city. And so when we do that, dissolve, for my money, is the better option here. We're going to enter a name for the new output layer, and we'll just call it hospital travel areas. For this first analysis, let's check the include reachable streets parameter, because this will actually create a visualization for the street network that was used to create the travel areas. And it's always nice to see that visualization, at least the first time we create the drive time areas. So from here, we click Run. And when the tool finishes, it'll create these kind of crazy looking drive time areas for us that are very splotchy and seemingly kind of all over the place. This is a grouped layer. So if you come over here and click this little expansion arrow here, we can see that there's a travel areas polygon that is visible, and also the reachable streets polyline layer that's also visible. I'm going to turn this one off so that we can see just the polygons, and you get a better sense of what's happening here. Of course, close into the hospitals, those light colors are the 0 to 5 minute travel areas. If you go out one concentric ring, we're in the 5 to 10 minute area. And then this final ring out here is the 10 to 15 minute travel area. If we click and turn on the reachable streets, even if we turn off the polygons, we get a really interesting understanding of what it looks like at the street level. And I'll zoom in here a little bit. And here we can see the graduated color scheme where we go from 0 to 5 and 5 to 10. This is great for a police department, an ambulance service, EMS, to get a good sense of what the street grid looks like around these hospitals and how the travel times look. It would be up to the analyst to figure out the best way to visualize this layer or these layers. Personally, I'll take out the streets because I find them to be a little bit chaotic, but nevertheless, they're important for a lot of reasons. You can see that a good portion of Philadelphia, and even right outside Philly, are covered by the drive time areas. There are a few obvious areas around the city that are outside that 15-minute threshold. What we want to do now is figure out what percentage of Philadelphia's geography resides within a 15-minute drive to a hospital. And to do that, we need to clip this travel area layer to the city limits. Essentially, we want to create a map that looks like this with the travel areas gone. So the question is, how do we get there? In ArcGIS Online, we use the overlay layers tool to accomplish that. We'll come back over to tools and type in overlay layers. It's this tool right here. The input feature here is going to be the hospital travel areas, and the overlay feature will be the city limits. We'll use Intersect to make sure that the city limits acts kind of like a cookie cutter to retain the drive time areas within the city. The output geometry is going to be a polygon, and here we have to enter a unique name. So for this, I would just call this travel areas clip to Philly. Once it finishes, you should have a clipped version of that travel area layer, and we can turn off the first one we created, and we can see that that layer has been clipped. And of course, this hospital still resides up here in the northeast. That's Abington Memorial. And its travel areas are right in this area here and probably around this region as well, possibly. So the area within Philadelphia that was attributed to Abington Memorial is still part of the travel area, which is important because it helps us understand that if trauma incidents occur in this little corridor here in the northeast, they are likely going to be dispatched to Abington Memorial. And now we can open up the attribute table to see what's happening here. We've got the three areas designated by size, and now we have the areas here in square kilometers that are clipped to the city. So if we come under here to information and scroll down a bit, we can see that the sum of values is 226.6 square kilometers. Pull up the trusty calculator, we can enter that figure. And now if we go to the city limits layer and pull up its attribute table, 222.6 divided by 368.89 is 60.34%. That answers one question. How much of Philadelphia is covered by travel areas within 15 minutes of a hospital? And the answer is just over 60%. So now that we've created the travel areas clipped to Philadelphia, we can visualize them in a way that makes them interesting. Best way is to click on it, activate the styles menu, and come under here. We can visualize by a field, try name and size, add that, and it'll change this. So if you look at the map here, it's changed it to a classification scheme that is much higher in contrast. That's helpful. And we can see the 0 to 5, 10 to 15, and 5 to 10 minute areas here. So now that we've created the drive time areas and we get a better sense of how much of Philadelphia resides within 15 minutes of hospitals, the next question is, what does that mean to trauma incidents that occur in the field? We can activate our shootings now to start working with them a little bit. And I'm actually going to move them so that they are on top of the travel areas so we can see them better. You can see how they're distributed throughout the city. What we'd like to know now is if these are shooting events that actually occurred, which they are, what percentage of them fell within 15 minutes of a hospital? To figure that out, we can use the Summarize Within tool. We come over to Analysis, click our hammer again, and Summarize Within pops up here. We want to summarize the shooting victimizations, and we're going to summarize them in terms of the travel areas that are clipped to Philadelphia. Now, this is an interesting one as we get down here. We can group this by a field of interest for us. In our case, I'd like to group this by fatal because I want to know what percentage of the shootings, both inside and outside the travel areas, were fatal. So here, the resulting layer might be travel areas with shooting counts summarized within, and now we just click Run. Once the tool finishes, it creates yet another layer that looks exactly like the clipped travel areas, only this one, if we open up the attribute table, it's going to have a key piece of information, and that is the count of points. This tells us how many shootings occurred in each travel distance around the hospital. And if we highlight this, we can, here, let me move this up. If we highlight, just hover over here, we can see that 105 shootings occurred in the innermost zones, that 0 to 5 minute travel area. 364 shootings occurred outside in the next zone, and then 322 shootings occurred in the 10 to 15 minute area. If we click these three dots and click on the information, then we know here that the sum of values is 791. So 791 of the 947 shootings occurred within 15 minutes of a hospital. So let's do a little math, and we would see 791 divided by 947 means that 83.53% of all shootings in Philadelphia in 2024 occurred within 15 minutes of a hospital. That's actually pretty good, although that also means that almost 15% did not. So we now have a lot of information to work with here in terms of our visualizations. We can create maps that show really interesting patterns of travel areas with shootings around or within them. We have a clear area or a few clear areas of the city that we can highlight in which shootings or any traumatic events are falling outside that 15-minute travel window. But we can also summarize some of this data in tabular format, like in a table in a side-by-side way. I've created a table that can capture some of this summary information that will be useful for us going forward. This table is a summary of coverages and shooting distributions in the travel areas and within Philadelphia at large. We've already talked about Philadelphia itself. We know that it is 368.89 square kilometers. There were 947 shootings in 2024, and those, of course, accounted for 100% of the shootings. If we now go back to the travel areas, we can enter that same information for comparison. So the way to do that is to, again, open up the attribute table for the travel areas that contain the shootings, and for the square kilometers, again, come under information, look at the sum of values, 222.6. We go back to the table. 222.6. Number of shootings total in these travel areas, again, 791. Enter that here. And if we pull up our calculator, we know that 791 is 83.53% of all the shootings. And then we have this area down here. The cumulative travel areas account for 222.6 square kilometers, and they make up 60.34% of the area of Philadelphia, which of course means that 39.65% of the city is not within 15 minutes of a hospital. And now we come to the fatal shootings. So let's go back to our map. We'll start with the larger file. So we open up the attribute table of the shooting file. We have 947 shootings. There's a field here called fatal, 0 for non-fatal, 1 for fatal. So we can click the 3 buttons, go to the information, and look at the distribution here. 209 shootings were fatal out of the 947. So we'll enter that in the table, 209, and now it's time to go back to the other ones. We can open the layer here, the table, and slide over to this far end. And we'll see that the tool created the group by summary. That's because we asked it to also include an analysis or a breakdown of fatal shootings. So we know that this bottom row here represents the 5-minute travel area. So if we click that, we can see here that, remember, 0 is non-fatal, 1 is fatal. So there were 23 fatal shootings within 5 minutes of the hospitals. So we can enter that here, 23. Next, that 5-minute area, we know that there were 62 shootings that were fatal. And finally, we know that there were 87 shootings that were fatal. That's 172 shootings out of the 791. Let's go back to our table, bring up the calculator. 172 divided by 791 means 21.74% of shootings were fatal. And now we have a nice comparison between the Philadelphia at large and the cumulative travel areas in terms of areas at square kilometers, the counts of shootings, and the percentages of the fatal shootings, which are not different very much at all. What we've done here is visualize the geography of time. Using ArcGIS Online, we mapped 15-minute drive time areas around Philadelphia's trauma hospitals, clipped them to the city limits, and then summarized where 2024 shooting victimizations of adults occurred within those coverage zones. While I used shootings as the example in this tutorial, analysts can apply the same workflow to any type of trauma data: car crashes, overdoses, or other medical emergencies. Still, shootings are among the most urgent forms of trauma and perhaps the most relevant to crime analysts who might work in jurisdictions with police policies around scoop and run. Mapping shootings helps us see how quickly victims can, or sometimes can't, reach critical care. In the next video, we'll take this a step further. I'll use the best facilities tool to model which hospitals are most likely to receive each incident, how evenly those cases are distributed, and what that means for emergency response. I'm Rob Kane, and this is GeoCrimeHub. Consider subscribing. Thanks. See you next time.